Lily was just 7 years old, living with her grandmother in a tiny wooden house on the snowy outskirts of Spokane, Washington, when her life changed forever. On a cold winter afternoon, while walking home from the bakery where she worked part-time, she heard a faint, heartbreaking whimper coming from behind an abandoned lumber yard. Following the sound, Lily discovered a German shepherd chained to a rusted pole, his fur matted with blood, one leg trembling in pain. She didn't know it yet, but this wounded dog, Milo, was no ordinary stray. He was a missing K9 hero, tied to a case so dark it would shake the entire town. What happened next would test Lily's courage, uncover secrets long buried, and turn an unlikely friendship into a story of survival, hope, and second chances. Grab your tissues. This one will melt your heart. And before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. Winter settled quietly over Spokane, Washington, the cold wind whispering through rows of bare trees and dusting the streets with a thin veil of snow. The sun dipped behind the gray skyline, leaving the air sharp and brittle, carrying the quiet hum of a city sinking into another frozen night. Lily Parker, a 7-year-old girl with messy golden blonde curls, pale skin, and striking blue-gray eyes, trudged along the cracked sidewalk, hugging a small paper bag from the local bakery to her chest. Her coat, faded and several sizes too big, hung loose around her thin frame. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes, despite their tiredness, still carried a spark of warmth and quiet resilience. Lily had been living with her grandmother, Ruth Parker, in a tiny wooden house on the outskirts of Spokane ever since the accident 3 years ago had taken her parents away. She never talked about that night, and Ruth never pressed. Some wounds, Lily had learned, were better carried than spoken aloud. After school, Lily worked part-time at Mabel's Bakery, a small, family-owned shop with peeling green paint and the warm smell of cinnamon rolls clinging to the air. The owner, Mrs. Doris Mabel, was a short, round woman in her late 50s, with rosy cheeks, curly dark hair streaked with gray, and the kind of smile that softened tired hearts. She adored Lily and often slipped her an extra pastry or two, insisting, "Skinny little thing like you needs more sugar." Lily appreciated her kindness, but deep down, she knew Mrs. Mabel was worried about a child working after school, worried about the old woman waiting at home, worried about the weight Lily carried quietly on those small shoulders. The streets were nearly empty as Lily walked home, her boots crunching softly against the snow. Her breath came out in tiny clouds, and the silence of the cold evening was broken only by the distant hum of traffic from downtown Spokane. Despite her young age, she had grown used to this solitude, to the rhythm of walking alone with only her thoughts for company. She often wondered what it would feel like to have a normal life again, one where she didn't have to worry about bills, food, or whether her grandmother's aching hands would manage another day at the sewing shop. But Lily was not one to complain. She had learned early that life rarely paused for sadness. You endured, you survived, and you found small moments of happiness where you could. As she passed the old lumber store at the edge of town, a faint sound slipped through the icy wind, a low, broken whimper. Lily stopped, her breath catching in her throat, and turned her head toward the source. It came from behind the abandoned yard, hidden behind stacks of warped wooden planks dusted with snow. She hesitated at first, biting her lip. Spokane had plenty of dark corners where trouble hid, and Ruth always warned her to stay on the main streets after dusk. But there was something in that sound, a quiet desperation that tugged at her chest, pulling her forward despite the cold crawling up her spine. Clutching her bag tighter, Lily stepped carefully around the rusting fence and into the shadowed yard. The place had once been alive with workers, but now it stood silent and forgotten, the broken windows of the old lumber shop covered in frost. She walked slowly, boots sinking softly into the snow, following the sound until it grew louder. Then she saw him. Chained to a rusted metal pole beneath a collapsing tin awning lay a German shepherd, his once proud coat matted with dirt and streaked with dried blood. His fur was black and tan, dulled by neglect, and his ribs pressed sharply against his skin from hunger. His hind right leg was twisted awkwardly beneath him, and one of his ears was torn at the edge, as though ripped in a fight long ago. He couldn't move more than a foot before the heavy chain clinked sharply against the pole, holding him in place. Yet, what caught Lily most were his eyes. deep, intelligent brown eyes, filled with pain but unbroken, watching her carefully with a mixture of suspicion and hope. For a moment, Lily stood frozen, her small hand trembling as she held the paper bag tighter. Her heart pounded in her ears as she took a cautious step closer. The cold seemed to vanish around her, drowned out by the thrum of her heartbeat. She lowered herself slowly onto the icy ground, trying to make herself smaller, less threatening. "Hi," she whispered softly, her voice cracking from both the cold and fear. The dog lifted his head slightly, ears twitching, but didn't growl. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, studying her with sharp, weary caution. Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of sweet bread she had saved from work, holding it out in her mittened hand. "I brought you something," she murmured. The German Shepherd hesitated before slowly leaning forward, his nose brushing against her glove as he carefully took the bread. The way he chewed, slow, deliberate, weak, told her he hadn't eaten in a long time. A soft whine escaped him, almost like a thank you, and Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She noticed something strange then, a small tattooed number inside the dog's left ear. Squinting through the dim light, she traced the faded markings with her eyes. It wasn't random. It looked like some sort of identification code. A memory stirred from something she'd overheard at the bakery. Mrs. Mabel had once mentioned a missing K9 dog connected to some military thing from years ago. Could this be him? Before she could think further, the crunch of tires on snow startled her. Lily's head jerked up, heart racing, as she caught sight of headlights slicing through the dim twilight. A large, dark-colored truck rolled past the street outside, moving slowly, its engine growling low and deep. She couldn't see the driver's face, but as the vehicle crept forward, her instincts screamed danger. Without thinking, Lily ducked behind a stack of wooden planks, pressing herself against the cold surface, holding her breath until the sound faded into the distance. When she peeked back toward Milo, she didn't know his name yet, but somehow it suited him. The dog had gone silent, his body tense, eyes fixed on the road where the truck had disappeared. Something wasn't right. Lily's chest tightened as she glanced around the yard. Why would someone leave a trained dog like this, chained and bleeding, behind an abandoned lumber shop? And why did that truck make her stomach knot with unease? Her instincts told her this wasn't an ordinary stray, and deep down, she sensed this was the beginning of something far bigger than she understood. Her small hands trembled as she stood up, brushing the snow from her knees. The cold had finally started to seep into her bones, but a different chill, a heavier one, settled in her chest. "I'll come back," she whispered to the dog, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I promise." The dog tilted his head slightly, as if he understood, before resting it back on his paws, his tail giving the faintest twitch. Lily turned and hurried out of the yard, glancing over her shoulder one last time as the shadows stretched longer across the snow. By the time she reached the sidewalk again, the street lamps had flickered on, casting a pale yellow glow across the frozen pavement. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of that truck lingered, as though it had never truly left. As she walked quickly toward home, clutching the bakery bag close, Lily's thoughts swirled with unease. She wanted to tell Ruth, but hesitated. Her grandmother already carried too many worries. Still, she couldn't shake the image of the chained dog, the haunted look in his eyes, and that strange tattoo on his ear. Lily didn't know it yet, but finding Milo would unravel secrets buried deep within Spokane's quiet streets, secrets tied to danger, to missing soldiers, and to a darkness that had been waiting beneath the snow. And somewhere, beyond the reach of the streetlights, a pair of unseen eyes watched her every step. The next morning, Spokane woke under a pale winter sun. Frost clung to the roofs of small wooden houses, and the air was sharp with cold, filling Lily Parker's lungs as she hurried down the narrow side street toward the abandoned lumber yard. Her oversized coat swayed around her knees, and in her mittened hands, she carried a small plastic bag filled with scraps of bread and a tiny carton of milk from Mabel's bakery. Lily had spent most of the night tossing and turning, haunted by the image of the German Shepherd chained beneath the collapsing awning. She couldn't erase his eyes from her mind, those deep, intelligent brown eyes, filled with quiet suffering but refusing to break. Her grandmother, Ruth Parker, had scolded her gently when Lily mentioned the dog, insisting it wasn't safe. "People abandon animals for reasons, Lily. she'd said softly while rubbing her aching hands with herbal ointment. But Lily wasn't convinced. Something about that dog was different. When she reached the lumberyard, the shadows of the morning stretched long over the snow. She slipped through the narrow gap in the fence, boots crunching softly, and made her way carefully to the back where the dog was. "Milo," she whispered. The name had come to her during the restless night. The German shepherd lifted his head slowly. His fur, though matted and dull, caught faint threads of sunlight, showing off his striking black and tan pattern. He looked stronger than the night before, though his right hind leg still lay stiff and unmoving against the snow. When Lily knelt beside him and pulled a small piece of bread from her bag, Milo gave a low, cautious growl. Just a warning. But as soon as her scent reached him, his tail brushed the snow once, faint but deliberate. Lily smiled softly and placed the bread on her mitten, holding it out. Milo leaned forward carefully, his warm breath fogging the cold air, and took the food gently from her palm. She reached her small hand closer to his ear, brushing away a patch of matted fur. That's when she saw it clearly, a faint tattooed code inside his left ear, faded but unmistakable. She traced the numbers carefully in her mind, her heart pounding. That wasn't something random. Someone had marked him deliberately. After spending nearly an hour feeding Milo and talking softly to him, Lily slipped away and headed for the small public library tucked behind the old post office. It was a quiet place where she sometimes went to read while her grandmother rested. Inside, the warmth hit her cheeks, and she walked quickly past the front desk, where Mrs. Janice Thornton, the librarian, sat sipping tea. Mrs. Thornton was in her early 60s, a tall, thin woman with silver-streaked dark hair pinned neatly in a bun, her sharp hazel eyes hidden behind delicate oval glasses. Though strict about library rules, she had a soft spot for children, and nodded at Lily with a gentle smile as she entered. Lily climbed onto one of the worn wooden chairs near the computer stations and typed the tattoo code into the search bar. At first, nothing came up. She bit her lip, thinking, then added, K9 military unit beside the numbers. This time something appeared, a short article from 2 years ago about a German shepherd named Milo, a decorated K9 dog who had saved 12 soldiers during an IED explosion in Afghanistan. Her breath caught as she scrolled through the pictures. The same sharp eyes, the same fur pattern, though back then his coat had been healthy and gleaming, his posture strong and proud. But the article ended with something that made Lily's stomach twist. Milo had gone missing during a classified transport mission. The military truck carrying him had been ambushed outside Yakima 2 years ago, and Milo had disappeared. No one had seen him since. She closed the browser and sat quietly, absorbing the weight of what she had discovered. Milo wasn't just an abandoned dog. He was a soldier, one the world had forgotten. Elsewhere in Spokane, Officer Ethan Brooks sat inside the cramped, fluorescent-lit police station, scrolling through a string of reports on his computer. Ethan was 28, with a lean, athletic build, short, sandy brown hair, and a faint scar cutting across his jawline, a remnant of an altercation during a drug bust 2 years ago. He wore a dark navy police jacket, its collar turned up, and his usually calm hazel eyes were shadowed by lack of sleep. Ethan had grown up in Spokane, raised by a single father who had been a firefighter. His father's death in a warehouse collapse 10 years ago had left him deeply protective of the vulnerable, shaping his decision to join the police force. Beneath his composed demeanor, though, Ethan carried a relentless drive to solve the cases that others had given up on. And one case still haunted him, the ambush outside Yakima, the one tied to Milo. 2 years ago, Ethan had been one of the first responders called in when the military convoy was attacked. The wreckage was catastrophic. 3 trucks destroyed, 2 soldiers wounded, and Milo's carrier left wide open. No trace of the K9. For months, Ethan had combed through leads, but the case went cold until today. A tip had come through dispatch that morning. A resident reported seeing a German shepherd with unusual behavior behind an abandoned lumber yard near 5th Avenue. It was a long shot, but the tattoo ID listed in the old reports matched what the witness described. Ethan grabbed his jacket, strapped his holster securely, and headed for the location. When Ethan arrived, the lumberyard was quiet, its broken windows glazed with frost, the wind carrying the faint creak of loose shutters. He moved carefully between stacks of old planks until the soft sound of a child's voice stopped him in his tracks. He rounded the corner and froze. A small girl, no more than 7, knelt in the snow beside a chained German shepherd, speaking to him softly as she fed him scraps from a crumpled bag. Her oversized coat made her look even smaller, and her messy blonde curls peeked out beneath a knitted hat. Ethan recognized the dog instantly. Even ragged, bleeding, and thin, Milo's sharp profile was unmistakable. "Hey," Ethan called gently, keeping his voice low and calm so as not to startle them. "Are you alone out here?" Lily startled, clutching the bag tighter to her chest, her wide blue-gray eyes darting up to meet his. I was just feeding him," she said, her voice small but steady. Ethan stepped closer, his boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. He crouched near the chained dog, carefully keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Up close, Milo's injuries were worse than he'd imagined. Deep gashes along his leg, fur matted with old blood, ribs sharply defined beneath thinning muscle. But Milo's gaze was focused, intelligent, following Ethan's every move. "Did you know," Ethan asked softly, nodding toward Milo's ear, "that this dog used to serve with the military?" Lily blinked, confused. "He, was a soldier?" "Yeah," Ethan said quietly, his breath clouding in the cold, "and someone went through a lot of trouble to make him disappear." Before he could explain further, a deep rumble echoed from the street outside, the low growl of an engine. Ethan's sharp instincts kicked in, and he straightened immediately, scanning the shadows. A dark-colored pickup truck rolled past slowly, its windows tinted black, pausing briefly before continuing down the road. Milo stiffened at the sound, ears twitching, a low growl vibrating softly from his throat. Ethan watched until the truck vanished, his jaw tightening. Something about this wasn't right. He turned back to Lily, his tone urgent but gentle. "Listen," he said firmly, "you shouldn't come here alone anymore. This isn't just about a dog. There's more going on than you realize." Lily hesitated, her small hands tightening around the paper bag. She glanced back at Milo, who had lowered his head onto his paws, his breathing slow but steady. "Then, we have to help him," she whispered. Ethan studied the determined little girl kneeling in the snow, and for the first time that day, he smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said softly, "we will." And though neither of them knew it yet, finding Milo had just unlocked the first door to a secret far darker than either imagined. The sky above Spokane was a heavy sheet of gray, clouds hanging low as if weighing down the entire city. The bitter wind bit at exposed skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine, as Officer Ethan Brooks guided Lily Parker and Milo through the narrow alley that led back to the abandoned lumber yard. The snow crunched softly beneath their boots, muffling their steps, as the last traces of daylight faded into shadows. Ethan's jaw tightened as he replayed what he had told Lily moments earlier, the truth about Milo's past. That convoy 2 years ago wasn't random, he'd explained, his voice low. Someone ambushed it on purpose. Milo wasn't just a working dog, he was part of an elite classified unit. Whatever happened that day, someone wanted him gone. Lily's small hands clutched her worn scarf as she stared at Milo, trotting unevenly ahead, his injured leg dragging slightly. "But why?" she asked softly, her breath forming tiny clouds in the freezing air. Ethan glanced down at her, his hazel eyes sharp but gentle. "Because Milo's valuable, Lily. He's more than a dog to them. He was trained for missions most people don't even know exist." Her jaw set, tiny shoulders stiff under her oversized coat. "Then we have to protect him," she whispered fiercely. Ethan nodded, admiring her courage even as worry gnawed at him. "That's exactly what we're doing." When they reached the lumberyard, the place was silent. Too silent. The creaking of loose shutters in the cold wind was the only sound as Ethan scanned the area, his instincts prickling. He raised a hand for Lily to stay close, his boots crunching softly as they followed a faint trail of blood leading away from the collapsing awning where Milo had first been chained. The droplets were fresh. Someone had been here recently. The trail led them to an old warehouse at the far edge of the lot, its faded siding streaked with rust, its windows dark and broken. One of the steel doors was slightly ajar, swaying against its hinges. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his holster, but he didn't draw. He crouched low, gesturing for Lily to stay behind him, and pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The air inside was damp and stale, carrying the faint smell of wet fur, rust, and gasoline. Ethan flicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom and illuminating rows of metal cages stacked against the far wall. The sight made Lily freeze, her small gloved hand covering her mouth as her wide blue-gray eyes welled with tears. Inside the cages were dogs of all sizes and breeds: huskies, retrievers, shepherds, terriers, some injured, some silent, others whimpering softly. A few cages were empty, their doors bent outward as though something had been ripped violently from them. Deep scratches along the bars told the silent story of fear and desperation. Lily knelt beside one cage where a thin, trembling golden retriever lay curled up, its breathing shallow. "Who would do this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Ethan scanned the nearby tables, his jaw clenching as he found a clipboard littered with handwritten notes and coded transaction slips. "This isn't just cruelty," he said grimly, his voice hard. "They're trafficking trained dogs, military animals, stolen and sold to the highest bidder. And Milo—" His hazel eyes flicked to the German shepherd standing alert beside Lily. "Milo's the biggest prize of them all." Before Lily could respond, Milo's ears shot up, his entire body going rigid. A low growl vibrated from his throat as his sharp eyes locked on the darkened hallway at the far end of the warehouse. Then came the sound, footsteps, heavy, approaching fast. Ethan raised his hand, signaling Lily to stay silent. But before he could react further, a man stepped out from the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and in his early 40s, dressed in a dark tactical jacket over a gray hoodie, black cargo pants, and worn leather boots. His face was hard and angular, with a jagged scar cutting across his left cheekbone, his sharp jaw dusted with dark stubble. His piercing steel-gray eyes were void of emotion, and his gloved hands hung casually at his sides, but his presence radiated danger. "Well," the man said in a low, gravelly voice, his tone calm but threatening, "you shouldn't have come here." Ethan stepped forward, planting himself between the man and Lily. "Spokane PD," he said sharply, his hand resting on his holster. "Step away from the cages, now." The man's lips curled into a faint, mocking smile. "You think this is about dogs? You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Before Ethan could reply, the man moved, fast, closing the distance between them with surprising speed. Ethan shoved Lily behind a stack of empty crates, drawing his weapon just as Milo lunged forward, barking furiously, his muscles straining despite his injuries. The German shepherd launched himself at the man's arm, teeth sinking into the heavy fabric of his jacket. A snarl echoed through the warehouse, and then a sickening thud. The man swung a thick metal rod he had concealed at his side, striking Milo hard across the ribs. The dog yelped and collapsed onto the cold concrete, his breathing ragged. "Milo!" Lily screamed, scrambling toward him, but Ethan caught her arm, pulling her back. Too late. From behind the crates, a second figure emerged, silent and quick. A masked man, shorter but stockier, wearing a black beanie and padded jacket. Without a word, he grabbed Lily from behind, clamping a gloved hand tightly over her mouth. Her muffled scream echoed in the cavernous warehouse. "Let her go!" Ethan shouted, spinning toward them, his weapon raised. The tall man from before kicked over a pile of metal crates, sending them crashing loudly to the floor and filling the air with dust and noise. The distraction was enough. By the time Ethan lunged forward, the masked man had dragged Lily toward the side exit, shoving her into the shadows beyond. Ethan fired once. The bullet ricocheted off a metal beam, harmless. Milo tried to stand, pushing weakly against the floor, but his injured leg gave out, and he collapsed, letting out a weak, pained whimper. Then there was silence. By the time Ethan reached the exit, the sound of tires screeching on icy pavement echoed faintly in the distance. A black pickup truck sped down the alley, taillights glowing briefly before vanishing into the darkness of Spokane's backroads. Ethan's chest heaved as he stood frozen, gun still in hand, his breath forming pale clouds in the bitter air. Behind him, Milo dragged himself slowly across the concrete, his deep brown eyes pleading, his muzzle nudging Ethan's boot. Ethan crouched beside him, running a steady hand along the trembling dog's neck. His voice was low but firm. "We'll get her back, buddy. I promise." Somewhere in the shadows, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, muffling the city beneath its weight. But in Ethan's mind, the silence felt louder than gunfire. The night had fully swallowed Spokane, and a soft but steady snowfall blanketed the streets in a muted white silence. The glow of street lamps reflected off icy roads, but inside the small Parker house, the warmth of the heater did little to soothe the growing terror. Ruth Parker, Lily's grandmother, sat slumped on the edge of the worn sofa, her frail hands clutching a damp handkerchief as she stared blankly at the silent phone on the table. At 65, Ruth was a small, thin woman with silvery hair pulled back into a messy bun, pale skin dulled by years of worry, and faded blue-gray eyes that carried exhaustion and love in equal measure. Raising Lily alone after her daughter's death had aged her more than time ever could, and now, with her granddaughter missing, her entire body trembled, as if the cold had seeped straight into her bones. Across town, Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against the hood of his police SUV, his jaw tight and shoulders tense beneath his heavy winter jacket. His sandy brown hair was damp from the melting snow, and his sharp hazel eyes scanned the darkened street restlessly. Every second counted. Beside him, Milo, the injured German shepherd, lay curled on a blanket in the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady. The dog's thick black and tan fur was matted with patches of dried blood along his ribs, but his dark, intelligent eyes were wide open, alert, and unblinking, as if he knew Lily was in danger. Ethan clenched his fists inside his gloves, replaying the events at the warehouse over and over. Lily's muffled scream, the masked man dragging her into the darkness, the screech of tires as the black pickup disappeared into the cold night. He had filed the report, but Spokane's resources were limited, and a winter storm was already moving in. If he wanted to find her alive, he couldn't wait for backup. He knelt by Milo and gently ran his hand down the dog's neck, feeling the tension under his thick fur. "You're my only lead, buddy," he murmured softly. "You know where they took her, don't you?" Milo blinked once and gave a faint whine, shifting his weight as he tried to sit up despite the pain. Ethan saw the determination in those deep brown eyes, the stubbornness of a soldier who refused to quit, and he felt his own resolve harden. Inside the precinct's dimly lit operations room, Ethan quickly pulled up Milo's archived military records on his tablet. His jaw tightened when he found what he was looking for. A tiny serial number embedded in Milo's service file linked to an experimental K9 tracking chip designed for covert missions. It was an outdated program, abandoned after funding cuts, but it still worked if he could access the right system. After bypassing layers of outdated security protocols, a faint signal pinged on his screen. Milo's location, or rather, where he had been taken. Meanwhile, Lily slowly regained consciousness, the dull ache in her wrists and shoulders pulling her back into the cold reality of where she was. The room was dark, except for the pale glow of a single exposed bulb swinging faintly from the ceiling. Its weak light revealed cracked cement walls, water-stained corners, and a stack of dusty crates pushed against one side. Her small body shivered violently as the cold seeped through her thin winter coat, her breath visible in the frigid air. Milo lay nearby, chained to a metal ring bolted into the floor, his sides rising and falling heavily as he struggled to recover from the blow he had taken earlier. When Lily stirred, Milo's ears twitched, and he let out a soft, comforting whine, dragging himself closer as far as the chain allowed. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his muzzle gently. "It's okay. I'm here," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady, her small blue-gray eyes glimmering with determination, despite the fear etched across her tear-streaked face. The sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway outside. Lily stiffened, her fingers curling instinctively into Milo's fur. The door creaked open, and a man stepped inside. It was Victor Kane, the same scarred man from the warehouse. Up close, his presence was even more intimidating. At 42, Victor was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being in control. His dark, weathered skin contrasted sharply with his icy hazel eyes, and the jagged scar running from his cheekbone to his jaw made him look even more severe. Dressed in a black parka and combat boots, his stance was deliberate and measured. Victor crouched slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, as he studied Lily with unsettling calmness. "You shouldn't have followed the dog," he said softly, his gravelly voice cutting through the cold silence. "Now you're in the middle of something bigger than you understand." Lily swallowed hard but refused to look away. "Please, let Milo go," she whispered, her voice shaking but defiant. Victor's gaze shifted to the chained German shepherd. "That dog," he muttered, almost to himself, "is worth more than anything in this room." He straightened and turned toward the door. "Keep her quiet," he barked over his shoulder before disappearing into the hallway again. Moments later, another figure entered. Elena Torres, Victor's second in command. At 38, Elena had an elegance sharpened by discipline. She was tall and slender with olive-toned skin, shoulder-length chestnut hair tied neatly into a low ponytail, and piercing green eyes that missed nothing. Dressed in a fitted dark gray coat and slim black gloves, she moved with quiet confidence, her expression unreadable. Elena set down a tray with a chipped mug of water and a piece of stale bread, placing it carefully beside Lily. "Eat," she said plainly, her voice cool but not unkind. "You'll need the strength." Lily stared at the tray but didn't touch it, clutching Milo's collar tightly instead. Elena's eyes softened just slightly, a fleeting glimpse of something human beneath her otherwise composed exterior. Without another word, she turned and left, locking the door behind her. Outside, the snow intensified, turning the outskirts of Spokane into a maze of whitewashed roads and icy drifts. Ethan's SUV plowed carefully through the winding industrial lanes, his headlights barely cutting through the curtain of falling snow. The faint signal from Milo's chip pulsed steadily on the tablet mounted to the dashboard, guiding him deeper into the shadows of Spokane's forgotten edges. After 30 tense minutes, Ethan pulled up to an abandoned logging facility on the northern outskirts, where the signal showed strong. The structure loomed large and silent against the swirling snow, a skeletal shell of corrugated steel and broken windows. He killed the engine and lights, letting the darkness settle around him. Ethan crouched beside Milo in the back seat, checking the improvised bandage wrapped around the dog's ribs. "This is it," he whispered, meeting the German shepherd's dark, alert gaze. "You ready, soldier?" Milo's ears perked faintly, his tail giving a single slow wag despite the pain. Ethan gave him a firm nod. "Good boy." He checked his weapon, adjusted his earpiece, and slipped quietly into the storm, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots. The bitter wind whipped across his face as he approached the facility, hugging the shadows along the side of the building. Faint voices carried from inside, and through a cracked window, Ethan spotted silhouettes moving near crates and machinery. He counted at least 5 men, all armed. He exhaled slowly, every muscle tense, his breath clouding the frigid air. Somewhere inside that facility, Lily was waiting, and he wasn't leaving without her. The storm had strengthened overnight, blanketing Spokane's outskirts beneath a relentless curtain of snow. The abandoned logging facility loomed like a dark skeleton in the distance, its rusted roof half buried under ice and drifting flakes. The bitter wind carried the smell of wet steel and damp wood, stinging Ethan's cheeks as he crouched behind an overturned dumpster, his breath forming short, misty clouds. Officer Ethan Brooks adjusted the earpiece hidden beneath his wool cap, his sharp hazel eyes fixed on the faint glow spilling from a cracked warehouse window ahead. Beside him, Milo, the battered German shepherd, shifted painfully but kept low, his thick black and tan fur dusted white with snowflakes. His right flank bore fresh bruises under a hastily wrapped bandage, and his left hind leg trembled slightly, but his sharp gaze was locked forward. Despite the pain, there was a fierce clarity in those deep brown eyes. The soldier's instinct still burned inside him. Ethan gently stroked his neck. "Easy, buddy. One more push," he whispered. Ethan scanned the perimeter carefully. 2 guards paced near the main loading bay doors, dressed in heavy black jackets, armed with sidearms holstered at their belts. Their boots crunched against the frozen ground, each step muffled by the storm. One of them, a broad man in his late 30s with a scruffy beard and pale skin, Grant Miller, had a permanent scowl etched into his scarred face. He looked like someone who'd spent years surviving on edge, the type who trusted no one and smiled at nothing. The second guard, Derek Holt, was younger, leaner, and jittery, with short blonde hair and nervous gray eyes darting into the shadows, constantly scanning as if expecting something to leap out of the storm. Ethan pulled out his suppressed Glock, checked the safety, and glanced down at the faint blue tracker on his tablet. The K9 chip inside Milo had brought him here, and somewhere beyond these walls, Lily was waiting. He whispered softly into his comm, Dispatch, this is Brooks. I've located the suspect's base, requesting backup at the Northern Logging Facility. Static crackled back in his earpiece before the dispatcher's calm voice replied, "Copy that, Officer Brooks. Units are on the way. ETA 15 minutes. Proceed with caution." 15 minutes. Ethan knew that was far too long. Inside the warehouse, Lily sat against a stack of wooden crates, her small wrists raw from the ropes binding them. Her thin coat offered little protection from the bitter cold seeping through the cracked concrete floor. Every breath she took fogged faintly in the dim light, and her wide blue-gray eyes darted between the door and Milo's empty corner. She didn't know Ethan was close, but she held on to the hope that he hadn't given up on her. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. The door opened, revealing Victor Kane, his towering frame filling the doorway. At 42, Victor looked even more imposing under the harsh light, his weathered skin accentuated by the deep scar slicing across his cheek, his hazel eyes cold and unreadable. Dressed in a black parka with a tactical vest beneath, he exuded authority and control. Behind him, Elena Torres followed silently, her dark gray coat buttoned neatly, her chestnut-brown ponytail tucked behind her shoulder, and her sharp green eyes betraying no emotion. "Move the girl to the truck," Victor ordered curtly, his gravelly voice carrying an edge of finality. "The buyer wants the dog, but she's leverage if anyone interferes." Lily's small fists clenched, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. Elena's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and for the briefest second, something flickered in those piercing green eyes. Guilt, maybe even doubt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Outside, Ethan spotted two more armed men circling the rear of the warehouse and knew he was out of time. Snow whipped violently across his vision as the storm worsened, howling around him like a warning. He crouched lower, touching Milo's collar gently. "You ready, soldier?" Milo gave a quiet huff, his ears twitching in acknowledgement. Ethan crept forward, hugging the side of the building until he reached the smaller service door. Using the shadow of a broken metal beam, he pried the lock silently with a slim tactical tool, easing the door open just enough for him and Milo to slip inside. The cold steel beneath his boots barely creaked as he stepped into the dark hallway beyond. The faint hum of machinery reverberated from deeper inside the facility, mingling with muffled voices and distant barks. Ethan crouched low and peeked around the corner, spotting Grant Miller leaning lazily against a stack of crates. Derek Holt stood nearby, pacing anxiously and tapping his fingers on the grip of his pistol. Milo stiffened, his ears twitching sharply. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, his injured body surging with sudden energy. Ethan barely had time to raise his Glock as Milo launched at Grant's arm, his teeth clamping down hard through the thick fabric. Grant yelled, struggling to shake him off, and the entire warehouse erupted in chaos. "Go!" Ethan barked, breaking from cover. Shots rang out, muffled by the storm and thick steel walls. Derek fired wildly, but hit nothing, his panic throwing his aim. Ethan moved fast, ducking behind stacked pallets as Milo held onto Grant's arm with unrelenting force, buying him precious seconds. The noise carried through the warehouse, and within moments, Victor stormed out from the back, his face twisted in anger. "Take them down!" he roared, pulling a matte black pistol from his tactical vest. Elena stood behind him, her sharp gaze darting toward the unfolding chaos, her lips pressed into a tight line. Ethan dove behind a steel column, returning fire carefully. 2 controlled shots that forced Victor and his men into cover. Heart pounding, he scanned the shadows and spotted Lily, bound and wide-eyed, across the warehouse floor. "Lily!" he shouted, voice cutting through the chaos. Her head snapped up, tears forming instantly, and she tried to scramble toward him, but the ropes held her tight. Before Victor could reach her, Ethan leapt forward, sliding across the slick floor to cut her bindings with his pocket knife. "Stay down," he whispered urgently, pulling her behind a stack of crates. But just as they regrouped, one of Victor's men swung around with a shotgun, aiming straight at Ethan. Milo lunged again, his powerful jaws clamping onto the man's forearm, forcing the weapon to misfire. The blast ripped into a wooden beam above them, showering splinters across the floor. Milo yelped from the strain, but refused to let go until Ethan had Lily safely shielded behind him. Sirens pierced the air outside. Spokane PD reinforcements had finally arrived. Red and blue lights reflected against the icy steel walls as shouts erupted from the perimeter. Within minutes, officers stormed the facility, their boots pounding against the concrete floor. Overwhelmed, Victor and his crew were forced to drop their weapons one by one. Ethan held Lily tightly as uniformed officers swept her away to safety. But his gaze shifted immediately to Milo. The German shepherd collapsed onto the cold floor, his chest heaving, blood soaking through the side of his bandage. "Milo, stay with me, buddy," Ethan murmured urgently, cradling the dog's head as his dark eyes fluttered. He turned sharply to a fellow officer. "Call Dr. Sarah Coleman now." Dr. Sarah Coleman arrived within 15 minutes, her dark SUV skidding slightly on the icy road before stopping at the warehouse entrance. In her mid-40s, Sarah was tall and lean, with short auburn hair tucked beneath a wool cap, fair skin reddened by the cold, and sharp green eyes behind wire-frame glasses. Dressed in a navy blue parka, layered over her medical scrubs, she carried a large black case of emergency supplies in one hand. Sarah knelt beside Milo immediately, her gloved fingers pressing carefully against his ribs. "Pulse is weak," she muttered, pulling out sterile gauze and a syringe filled with pain relief. "He's lost a lot of blood, but if we move fast, I can stabilize him for transport." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight as he brushed snow from Milo's fur. "Do whatever you have to." Sarah looked up, her expression steady but urgent. "I will, but we need to get him to the clinic, now." Ethan scooped Milo carefully into his arms, his breath clouding in the freezing air as the officers cleared a path through the swirling snow. Tonight, Milo had saved them all. Now it was Ethan's turn to save him. The blizzard had passed, but Spokane still lay buried under a heavy white silence, the streets blanketed in thick snow as the sun struggled to break through pale gray clouds. Inside the brightly lit emergency room of Dr. Sarah Coleman's veterinary clinic, the air was tense and heavy. The scent of antiseptics mixed with the faint metallic tang of blood as monitors beeped steadily in the background. Milo lay unconscious on the operating table, his chest rising and falling faintly beneath a thin oxygen mask. His thick black and tan fur had been carefully shaved around his injured ribs, revealing deep bruises and puncture wounds from the brutal fight at the warehouse. His body trembled involuntarily, muscles twitching as if resisting the darkness pulling him under. Standing at the head of the table, Dr. Sarah Coleman worked with intense focus, her auburn hair tucked beneath a surgical cap, her sharp green eyes darting between the vital monitor and her gloved hands. At 45, Sarah was tall and lean, with years of military service etched subtly into her disciplined posture. She had served as a combat veterinarian in Afghanistan, patching up K-9 units under gunfire, and tonight, that same determination was written across her face. "Heart rate's dropping, 40 beats per minute," called out Dr. Anthony Reyes, Sarah's assistant, a calm but energetic man in his early 30s. Anthony was medium-built, with short black hair, tan skin, and steady brown eyes behind rimless glasses. He had worked under Sarah since leaving his position as an army medic, and was known for staying composed even in emergencies. "Push 2 cc epinephrine," Sarah ordered firmly, not looking up. Anthony prepared the syringe, his hands moving quickly and without hesitation. Outside the glass walls, Lily Parker sat curled up on a plastic chair, her small frame swallowed in an oversized hospital blanket. Her pale cheeks were stained with dried tears, and her tangled blonde hair framed a face tight with exhaustion. Her blue-gray eyes were wide, locked on Milo's unmoving form through the window. She hugged her knees to her chest, her breath fogging faintly as she whispered to herself, "Please don't leave me, Milo. You promised?" Beside her, Officer Ethan Brooks leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He had removed his heavy winter jacket, revealing a simple dark sweater stretched across his broad shoulders, his sandy brown hair damp from melted snow. His sharp hazel eyes stayed fixed on Sarah and Anthony inside the operating room, his jaw tense with unspoken worry. The minutes stretched into hours. Ethan ran updates to dispatch, coordinated statements from the precinct, and reassured Ruth Parker over the phone, but his gaze always returned to Lily, sitting silently by the door. Finally, after nearly 6 grueling hours, the steady monotone of the heart monitor spiked sharply, filling the room with urgent beeps. "Milo's flatlining," Anthony announced, his calm voice breaking for the first time. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Defibrillator pads now." Anthony pressed the paddles against Milo's shaved chest, A high-pitched tone filled the room before a sharp zap jolted Milo's body upward. The heart monitor remained flat. "Again!" Sarah barked, sweat beading at her temples despite the cool air. Another surge of electricity pulsed through Milo's small but powerful frame. For one agonizing second, silence filled the room. Then, beep, 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 a faint but steady rhythm appeared on the monitor. Milo's tail twitched weakly as Sarah exhaled the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "We've got him back," she whispered, her voice rough but relieved. News of Milo's near-death rescue spread quickly across Spokane the next morning. Headlines lit up local newspapers and social media. 7-year-old girl saves missing K-9 hero. Milo, the forgotten soldier, fights for his life. Neighbors stopped by the clinic to bring warm food, handwritten cards, and small donations. At Mabel's diner, old veterans huddled around tables, passing Lily's picture from phone to phone, their voices hushed with admiration. By noon, a crowd had gathered outside the clinic, despite the freezing air. Among them was Captain Harold Green, a retired military officer in his late 50s with silver-gray hair, weathered skin, and sharp blue eyes hidden beneath a fur-lined cap. Harold had served as a K-9 unit commander for over 20 years before retiring, and now volunteered with a local animal rescue group. When Ethan stepped outside to get some air, Harold approached him, boots crunching in the snow. "That shepherd inside," Harold said in a deep, gravelly voice. "He isn't just any working dog. I trained dogs like him back in Kandahar." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "I know. We found his service ID tattooed in his ear. He was on a top-secret mission when his unit went down." Harold's gaze softened. "Dogs like Milo save lives, officer. The least we can do is save theirs." He handed Ethan an envelope thick with donation slips and business cards. "Tell Dr. Coleman to use this for his recovery. We've already raised $5,000 from veterans groups statewide. He's one of us." Inside, Sarah finished the last stitches along Milo's ribcage and stepped back, pulling off her gloves. Her green eyes softened as she finally allowed herself a brief smile. "He's stable," she said quietly as she stepped into the waiting area. "He's going to make it, but he'll need a long recovery." Lily leapt to her feet, running to hug Sarah tightly around the waist, her tears soaking the vet's scrub top. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her tangled hair. "He's a fighter, sweetheart, just like you." Over the following weeks, Spokane rallied around Milo. Donations poured in, and animal rights organizations partnered with military veterans to support his recovery. The clinic became a small hub of community care, filled with handmade cards, little paper hearts, and dozens of visitors dropping by to see the hero dog. Still, the damage was permanent. After multiple examinations, Sarah finally delivered the news that Milo's left hind leg had suffered irreversible nerve damage from the brutal blows. He would never run the way he used to. Lily's lip trembled when she heard, her small hands clutching Milo's fur tightly. Ethan crouched beside her, resting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He doesn't need to run to be a hero," Ethan said softly. "He already saved you. That's what matters." Sarah nodded in agreement. "And from today, Milo isn't just any dog. He's officially recognized as a retired K-9 veteran. That means lifetime medical care, a stipend, and a place of honor." As Ethan signed the paperwork on Milo's behalf, Lily bent down and pressed her forehead gently against Milo's. His deep brown eyes gazed up at her, half-lidded but warm, and his tail wagged faintly against the blanket beneath him. They had survived the storm together, but deep down, Ethan knew the battle wasn't over. Victor Kane's arrest was only the beginning. Someone far bigger was behind the K-9 smuggling ring, and Spokane was only one piece of a much darker puzzle. 6 months later, the snow had melted from Spokane's streets, replaced by warm spring sunlight and the hum of new beginnings. The city square, usually quiet on Sundays, was now overflowing with people gathered beneath fluttering banners and the proud display of the American flag. A wooden stage had been built in front of the old courthouse, decorated with red, white, and blue ribbons. Folding chairs filled the plaza, but most of the crowd stood shoulder to shoulder, holding signs, flowers, and small flags to honor the heroes of the night, when a K-9 veteran and a little girl changed everything. At the center of it all, Lily Parker, now 7.5, stood in a simple pale blue dress that brushed her knees, clutching a microphone with both trembling hands. Her tangled blonde hair had been brushed smooth for the occasion, but a few stubborn strands still escaped and danced in the warm breeze. Her blue-gray eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with a quiet strength she had discovered within herself. Standing close by, Milo sat proudly on his specially designed support harness, his thick black and tan fur gleaming under the sunlight. The hind leg he had lost full use of no longer defined him. Instead, a custom-built titanium brace allowed him to walk with steady dignity. Next to them, Officer Ethan Brooks stood in full uniform, his badge polished to a shine, his sandy brown hair neatly trimmed, and his hazel eyes focused on the stage. Today, his usual stoic expression softened, pride mingling with relief. Lily's small voice echoed through the square, carried by the microphone, but strengthened by emotion. "Milo once saved the lives of heroes," she began, glancing down at the German shepherd sitting loyally at her side. "And when he needed help, we saved him. Today I learned something. We don't leave anyone behind. Not people, not animals, not anyone." The crowd fell silent. Then, slowly the applause began, swelling like a rising tide until it thundered through the entire square. People cheered, cried, and waved their flags, some holding handwritten signs reading, "Thank you, Milo," and "Heroes come in all forms." At the side of the stage, Ruth Parker sat quietly in the front row, wearing a soft gray cardigan over a simple floral dress. At 65, her frail frame and silver hair were illuminated by sunlight, giving her a gentle, dignified presence. Her blue-gray eyes shimmered as she wiped a tear with a handkerchief clutched tightly in one hand. Months ago, Ruth had feared she would lose her granddaughter forever, but now she watched Lily stand before the entire city, proud and unbroken. Ethan stepped up to the podium next, his uniform catching the afternoon light as he addressed the crowd. "When we found Milo, he was forgotten, injured, abandoned, and left behind. But this community came together. You saved him, and together, we uncovered a network exploiting dogs like him for profit." His jaw tightened slightly as he continued. "Thanks to the work of this city, Victor Kane and his entire ring are behind bars, and we've made sure no other K-9 veteran will suffer the same fate." Applause erupted again, this time accompanied by cheers from a group of veterans standing proudly near the front. Among them was Captain Harold Green, the retired K-9 unit commander who had helped rally the donations for Milo's recovery. Harold, in his late 50s, stood tall with his silver-gray hair gleaming beneath his cap, a proud smile spreading beneath his weathered face. He raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, and Ethan returned it solemnly. After the ceremony, a new plaque was unveiled at the city square, engraved with golden letters, "In honor of Milo, a hero who saved lives and taught us compassion. We do not leave anyone behind." The crowd parted as Milo walked slowly across the small ramp built specially for him, Lily's hand resting lightly on his back for balance. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of the 7-year-old girl and the decorated K-9 side by side, a symbol of resilience, unity, and second chances. Afterward, the celebration continued. Volunteers set up tents where hot cocoa, sandwiches, and cookies were served to anyone who wanted to stay and share stories. Near one of the booths, Ethan spoke with a small group of veterans dealing with PTSD, introducing them to Milo, who had recently been certified as an official therapy dog. One of the veterans, Sergeant David Whitmore, a tall man in his early 30s with close-cropped dark hair, warm brown skin, and deep-set gray eyes, crouched down slowly to meet Milo's gaze. David had lost part of his right leg in Afghanistan, and now used a lightweight carbon fiber prosthetic hidden beneath his jeans. At first, his expression was guarded, the weight of old memories reflected in his face. But, as Milo nudged his hand gently, David's lips curved into the faintest smile. "He knows," David murmured softly, scratching behind Milo's ear. "He feels it." Ethan nodded, watching Milo lean calmly into the veteran's touch. "That's his gift," Ethan said quietly. "He's more than a survivor. He's a healer now." By evening, the square was lit by soft golden lights strung between lampposts, casting a warm glow over the thinning crowd. Lily sat on the edge of the stage, swinging her legs gently while holding a small bouquet of wildflowers someone had given her. Milo rested beside her, his head on her lap, his breathing steady and calm. Ruth joined them, sitting on Lily's other side, her delicate hand resting on her granddaughter's knee. Ethan approached slowly, his boots crunching lightly on the cobblestones. "You two ready to go home?" he asked gently. Lily nodded, looking up at him with a shy but proud smile. "Can we stop by Milo's favorite park first?" she asked softly. Ethan chuckled, kneeling to ruffle Milo's fur. "I think we've earned it." As they walked away from the square, leaving behind the banners and speeches, the city's heart beat with something stronger than pride. Milo, once abandoned and broken, had become a symbol of hope. Lily, once a quiet, lonely girl, had become the voice of compassion for an entire community. And Spokane, once haunted by its own forgotten shadows, now carried a new lesson carved into its memory. Heroes come in all forms, and sometimes they have 4 legs. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as lightning from the skies. They come quietly in the form of a loyal dog, a brave little girl, or a community choosing love over fear. Milo's story reminds us that God places signs in our lives, moments where we are called to act, to care, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Every day in our busy lives, it's easy to walk past suffering, a lost soul, a struggling neighbor, an abandoned animal. But maybe, just maybe, God whispers to us through these moments, "Be my hands, be my heart." And when we listen, when we choose compassion, we become part of his miracles. So, if Milo's journey touched your heart, we ask you to share this story with someone you love. Leave us a comment below about where you're watching from, or tell us about your own miracle. And if you want to be part of our growing family of hope, subscribe to our channel, because together we can shine more light into a world that desperately needs it. May God bless you, your loved ones, and every small act of kindness you choose today. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin with you.